Coming up next, we have Sun M. Sun M is a narrative designer and a senior writer on both AAA and indie games. They are also the studio director of Perfect Garbage. So without further ado, let us welcome Sun M to our stage.
Howdy, everybody. My name is Sun M, and today we'll be talking about putting yourself in a box, or if we're going to give it the more formal title, A Beginner's Guide to the Importance of Categories in Games. So before we get started, I'd love to share a little bit about me and why I think I might have some information or some insights on this type of thing, so you don't have to believe everything I say. You can follow your hearts. So really quick, I'm Sun M, as I said. I am the co-founder and studio director of the indie game studio Perfect Garbage Studios. We are releasing Love Shore this year, and we have many more projects on the road. I'm also a narrative designer and senior game writer, and I've worked in both the indie and the AAA space, so I'm quite familiar with production pipelines as well as the marketing and shipping and basically just getting a game out there. I've learned a lot. I also enjoy analyzing market trends in the indie space, particularly. I think it's a lot more flexible and interesting than the AAA space, but I do say so myself, as well as the perception of said market. So how does the market react to what we put out there, and how does it end up feeding back information to us, those of us making games? And last but not least, I'm a huge horror fan. It's crippling at this point, but I refuse to let it go. And I bring this up because a lot of the games I reference might be adjacent to the genre. So to kind of lay off a soft roadmap of what we're going to be talking about, our goal is to understand the importance of categorizing your game, i.e. picking the genres, the tropes, the aesthetics, the themes, or straight up the gameplay loops that you're going to be using to produce your game, i.e. the section regarding pre-production and production, working with elements and genres during this design stage that allow you to learn a lot about the process of what you're making, pitching and investment, how do publisher and founder perception on the categories that you use to describe your game matter or impacts you, marketing and promotion, how do these categories that we use, as well as these systems that we use, reach our target audience, especially when we're dealing with online marketplaces with tagging systems. And last but not least, final thoughts. What's the big deal? Why do we care? Why do we have to label anything? Please stop making me label my game. You cry out, and I'm like, I'm sorry, I also hate labeling, but there's a reason we do it, and I think it's important in games, and we should talk about it a little bit. So starting off with pre-production and production. When you're designing your next project, pre-production takes a bulk of your early stage time, as well as production, i.e. making the game, takes a lot of the rest of the time. I will say a lot because there's a good solid chunk left for shipping and porting, which will also swallow your time. So categories and genres help you define the aspects of your game and what you're looking to create. I think it's important to start looking at these categories or these genres or gameplay loops, depending on, I'm going to make those terms interchangeable throughout this talk. So please feel free to use what you like best. They all mean a little bit different things, but for the sake of this discussion that we're having, let's just mash them all together. But understanding the type of category your game is going to be operating under, is it a roguelike? Is it a visual novel? Is it a first-person shooter? Really early in the development can help you define the space that you're working in. Now, I'm not saying you have to be married to this definition, but especially if it's one of your first games, it's a great building block to let you hyper-focus on the kind of gameplay loop that you're looking forward to making. These distinctions help you understand the system that you want to work within, not just to put you in a box, but to develop concepts outside of it. If I understand how a roguelike works or how a visual novel works, at least in the mainstream setup of these games, looking at my competitors, or colleagues, that was a really ominous way to say that. But looking at my colleagues and the games that they release, I can think about, okay, I know how it's expected of this genre. How can I change or build off or elevate or do something a little bit ridiculous that hasn't been done before with this loop? If you understand the core system that you're using, you can understand to diversify it. And this is very much like the theme of you need to learn about history so you can improve the future. all of that good stuff. I think it's very important. And these categories also give you the chance to narrow your goals and have an understanding of the mechanical feel and gameplay loop of what you're trying to make. I am looking at a lot of folks who are starting out making games and they really want to make a roguelike because roguelikes are really in right now and that's really, really exciting. But do you understand the systems that go into place in making a roguelike? And I am someone who works really, really well with breaking things down into components. And that's how I can best understand what I need to do at each stage. Milestones, if you will, if you want to use some horrible terminology. So if you can understand these sections of gameplay loops that are required for the genre or the category that you're looking to build in, you can actually attempt to adequately scope what your project is going to look like or how much manpower or labor or other assets it's going to take. I think this is incredibly valuable in the pre-production stage because it can help guide you on your actual ability to release a product. We all have big dreams, but always first games and second games are all about finding what rhythm you work best in and what categories and genres you really like to thrive in or you think you can flourish in. So, categories and building out systems. Having an understanding of the game genre you're working in can allow you to explore different ways of pushing new elements into design. I bring up Hades and Stardew Valley as two examples. Both of them have very core designs that are well recognized by those categories. We know Hades is a roguelike, procedurally generated rooms. We know that Stardew Valley is a farming simulator down to all the crafting that you can do. But what's great about these games is that they push a lot of new elements into these familiar systems. And I don't think, in my opinion, disclaimer, that you can do that without actively understanding the system that you're working in, understanding that category. Sure, locking yourself into a category early on is not ideal. Nobody likes to be put in a box, especially me. Absolutely hate it, but it's a great way to start small and to build upon it. I'd rather start small, understand my system, and then grow more advanced as I progress than to start too big and kind of fumble around unsure of what I'm working on. Are you making a specific game? Learn the system needed to successfully develop one, then look at outside elements that might enhance the concept of something new and refreshing. I'm actually going to use my co-founder Emmett as a great example in which we were trying to build a system, and after we had the core loop down, he said, let's find reference points outside of games of how we want to tell this story, because we know how our system works. Let's find a new way to tell it within this system that might not be done in this category before. And I thought that was such an amazing idea. Again, the horror movies played a big role in that, in which we watched a bunch, but being able to look at elements outside of your game after you have an understanding of the system that you're working in can really help you, one, understand your constraints and build upon it, and two, find unique ways to approach said constraints that are completely new or refreshing to that category. You need to start somewhere. I got a little ahead of myself, but you do need to start somewhere. My opinion, start small, do it quick, but start anywhere that you want, truly. Just make sure that you understand what category or what you're building. If it's multiple categories, that's totally okay as well. Now, pitching and funding. Pitching and funding is my favorite kind of conversation because it's always married to indie game development. So categories as well as getting funding, categorizing your game as well as getting funding. Despite how we say that we shouldn't be tied to genre expectations, these expectations rule a lot of funding in the indie scene. I am going to be the first one to tell you that making your game a specific genre or category out of necessity is the worst thing in the world. I hate being in a box. I hate having to follow certain rules, certain systems down to the T. But I also understand that expectations are a thing you cannot escape, and being smart about the genre as well as the categories that you use can help you navigate these expectations. So one is that conveying to a potential publisher and investor what your project is quickly, and secondly, as is a big factor, is how you can get pitching. So a great example is I have Backbone. These are both the covers of their pitch decks. You can find them on the Glitch's website, glitch.mn, in which they have the Founders Kit. So just Google Founders Kit or look up Hey Glitch on Twitter. And what they do in that is they have a bunch of pitch decks available from amazing teams that have been willing to share them. And the two that I have here is Backbone, also called with its logline a dystopian noir adventure. Immediately, I know what the setting is like. I know what the writing is like with noir, and I know that's an adventure game, i.e. that there's some level of exploration or investigation that might be involved. We also have Bear and Breakfast, recently released. Yay, very fun game. And under their description for their game, they call it an adventure management breakfast. So adventure tells me some level of exploration, some level of interactivity with what I'm looking at in the environment. I'm exploring something. Management tells me there's a life sim involvement. I'm going to be building something, maintaining something. And breakfast gives me that little humor of, oh, okay, I might be maintaining like a bed and breakfast type scenario, i.e. bear and breakfast. All of these little log lines are super, super important when pitching because it tells folks that you're talking to, hey, this is exactly the game we're making, not perfectly to a T. We're still going to surprise you, but you can be in the correct mindset when looking at our pitch materials. Now, it's important to choose your categories wisely, as the potential funder will use these terminologies to assist in judging your materials. I bring this up because if you're not super certain your game is one category or another, I would take the time to think about what you want to use. I bring this up from personal experience. Learning how to navigate categories requires definitely a lot of trial and error, but do help in understanding how you can get your message across quickly. When you are not getting it across quickly, you'll learn that also pretty quickly. So a funder's perception, i.e. in its relationship to categories. Perception of the genre and the categories you placed on your game will provide insight, whether favorable or not, to a potential partner. Here's how this may present. Some examples. You build a prototype describing a game as a roguelike. The funder will play the build that you're providing for this pitch with the expectation that it should feel good as a roguelike. I bring this up is that if you're going to use a category of maybe a mechanically a well-understood game loop, you're going to have to bring that energy to whatever pitch material that you have, because that will be the expectation that is set by that. Is this good or is this bad? It's mixed. If you are really excited about your game loop and you're really, really happy about it and you know that's going to fit this sequence, it's a great way to get this idea across to whoever you're pitching to or asking for funding from. The counter is that if you're still working on that system, or that you find that, yeah, you're building a roguelike, but really you like a lot more of the hack and slash elements, and there's not really a lot of procedural loop more so than a linear story, then maybe calling it a roguelike is doing you a disservice, because now there's an expectation for certain game elements that might not be showcased in what you're actually making, and thus making the funder or publisher feel like there's a disjointed relationship between what you're saying you're going to make versus what the game feels like. Another example is if you're defining a new approach to the genre, you need to showcase how it's different than those in that category. I really think that like Carry On and Cult of the Lamb, which are both examples of games that I really, really like, showcase how they're bringing game structures that we're quite familiar with, but in a new, fresh, interesting take. Carry On, you're playing the monster. Cult of the Lamb, it's almost like a management farming sim, except you're building a cult. Both these aspects bring new perspectives to these genres in a fun way that allow players to engage in something new, and I'm sure was easily showcased to the funders or publishers that they worked with. Lastly, the categories you picked are highly competitive or favorable in the market. Sometimes certain categories or genres are deemed riskier in a funder's eyes. Check the market. I know this sounds annoying. I agree with you. I hate having to put my game into a specific market system to understand how it's going to be perceived. But if you're building a game and you're unsure of the categories that you want to use, you're kind of pulling a little bit from elements each way. Knowing how to talk about your game or present your game to publishers and funders might help assist in getting a better chance at getting funding. So a great way to do this is if you're building a hack and slash RPG, visual novel, tactical game, looking at the market of those 4 tags that I just said and understanding how well the games are doing in this space, how big is the competition, how not big is the competition, how does your game stand out in these competitions, what are the average price range in these categories? These are all big deals that are calculated in the funder's eyes as whether or not your game is risky or not. I mean, there's a million other factors, of course, but this does help. That kind of smoothly carries me into marketing and promotion. I've talked so much about how funders are going to perceive your game and how it's going to look like to funders as well as investors, but how does the audience perceive your game? It's a big deal, especially if you're working in the indie sphere. We work hard to build our communities up and we work hard to promote our game. So what is the best way we can get the players that we want to play playing our game? It's important when you're in the marketing space, especially in the indie space, to have a great strategy for marketing your game on social media. Doing this, even as you're developing your game or your project, is always difficult when you have a limited amount of characters. I use Twitter religiously. It's an unfortunate character trait. Some will say my biggest flaw, some will say my greatest weakness. Both things matter to me, but the box I want to live in is that it's an asset that I can use. And the best way to do that is understanding, even with the limited characters that I'm allowed, a great way to showcase my game. Because yes, visuals will always help, but being able to read what my game is about in less than 140 characters is a very strong ability. Categorizing and using genre tags are a great way to get the feeling of your game across to your intended audience as quickly as possible. Outside of games, books use tagging systems, art uses tagging systems. If you're on any social media platform, we use hashtags or tags, or I don't know what Facebook uses. I think also tags. I am uncertain. Maybe groups. They're weird. They're anomaly for me. But the point of the matter is that tagging systems are what allows people to navigate the space of social media. And we can kind of utilize that same mentality when building our categories in discussion of marketing specifically. So categorizing your game in a language is a language to players. Categorizing in itself is a language, I like to think. A language that is not English, because sometimes things mean different things than I think they do. So some great examples that I have here are Supergiant's recent announcement for Transistor. I'm so sorry for stealing y'all's tweets, but they're good. Transistor, our award-winning sci-fi action RPG. Already, you get everything. You get that one, it's award-winning, which it's great, really excited for them. Two, it's science fiction, so you already know the elements of how the aesthetic is going to feel, as well as the environment and world building. Three, it's action-based, so you know there's going to be a combat system at place. And four, it's an RPG, so there's some level of controlling your stats, as well as narrative interaction with the characters that you have around them. All of these tags that they've just implemented, or the categories that they use to define their game, instantly told me what this game is about without going into full detail. I have another example here with Love Shore. That's from me, little me. But Love Shore is a beautiful game set in a cyberpunk city that follows some of the characters I talk about, but I end it with make choices, help companions, fight gods, and learn to understand yourself. So I imply making choices as a way to show you that there's narrative branching decisions, which kind of tells you interactive fiction, visual novel right away. Help companions is a reference to the dating sim component of Love Shore, as well as the friendship simulation part of Love Shore. So you already know that you're going to be engaging with NPCs the whole time. Finding gods means there's definitely some antagonism with enemies that you'll be facing with this game. And learn to understand yourself means that the player has a rich story that they're going to go through by playing the player character. All these elements, again, quickly define what this game is about, as well as some fun neon visuals. Another great example is Backbone. I really love how they broke it down. A post-noir detective adventure about a raccoon private eye in a dystopian Vancouver, BC. So post-noir tells me the writing style and atmosphere and mood. You instantly think of the moody detective scene. Adventure tells me there's going to be exploration, and the fact that I'm a private eye means that I will be probably solving a mystery. All of these things tell me exactly what this game is about without going into detail in the actual core narrative game or the core loop. I'm still left wondering what is actually going on, but I'm given a really strong sense of whether or not I will like it or not from the beginning. So just like funders, players have expectations for genres, whether it's favorable or not. Understanding this market is important to making sure you are selling your game to the audience that will adore it. This doesn't just mean gameplay, it also means style, themes, the narrative, and the aesthetics that you're looking at. And using these genres and categories, you can really showcase how familiar yet refreshing your game is, especially if you don't have a playable release, i.e. when using social media to showcase your game, you can bring some cool elements and tie them together as a way to market that, yeah, our game has maybe a roguelike system, but it's also based in the Greek underworld mythology and has a really unique form of storytelling. So using the marketplace category. A really great tweet. I didn't want to share who said it, but awesome tweet says that changing these tags, a dev team was able to take fans from the visual novel space who might have never found their games, was tagged adventure, and instead turn to the visual novel community and get interest from those. Genre matters, and I couldn't agree more. Steam, itch.io, and other online game marketplaces utilize tagging systems to help categorize games, recommend them to players who enjoy similar ones, and help promotion. It is sad to talk about how there is kind of an algorithm at play, but there is in these events. And it's important that you understand that when you're tagging your game on Steam, especially when you're getting close to release, it's important to look at what players might be into, or the people in your community are more likely to play. For example, Love Shore is a visual novel. I know exactly the kind of market I'll be hitting, and it's perfect for the game that we're making. Calls of the Lamb, I have an example. Their first tag is cute by the community, which I love, as well as action roguelite, dark humor. So it immediately tells you all the aspects of a lot of the feel of this game before having even gotten started. Hyperdot is a great example as well. Action, arcade, difficult, experimental, puzzle. You know exactly what you're kind of getting into. But what's great is that by having these categories, you can find them on Steam and they can find their correct audiences. Now, the rule of thumb is that these categories are important as it allows players to find games, but they're not forever. Finding combinations that get you closer to your target audience is always the goal, but you don't have to be married to a category as you develop your game and learn what you're actually truly building. Sometimes you might think you're starting off as a roguelike and halfway through realize that you're developing a brawler or a hack and slash. Totally okay. But if you're willing to just remaster how you talk about your game to better reflect those changes, you're only doing yourself a better service. And it's important to remember that categories, tags, and genres give expectations, but, and this was one of my favorite tweets that I found while thinking about this topic. So I picked up a game called Young Souls, a beat 'em up, hack and slash, action RPG game, all those categories, according to the Steam tags. Definitely not the kind of game I'd normally be playing, but I was lured by the pretty art style. I'm liking it so far. What I love about this tweet is that this is somebody who is not into the genre at all described in Young Souls, and yet was pulled into it. Categories aren't a death sentence. They don't mean the end of where your game basically reaches its target audience. They're a stepping stone, just like when you're building your game into getting a point of what you're making across. And they should never feel like you're stuck there forever. So understanding how categories, genres, and tags are perceived will assist in many aspects of game development and release, but they're not all you need. They're an extension of what you're making, but not a rule book. What makes categories useful is that it guides people with basic idea of what you're developing and helps them decide whether or not they're ready to engage with the type of media that you're creating. And I think that is an exceptionally cool thing. So I guess all in all, you should put yourself in a breakable box, not so much as a permanent box. Thanks for joining me for this. I, again, am Sun M. I'd love to chat about this more. I'm always really interested in understanding the market and how categories, as well as genres and aesthetics, really play a role into reaching target audiences. You can reach me on my email on screen, as well as my website, and you can also find me on Twitter, which I didn't say, at BogBoogie. Thank you so much for joining me with this talk, and I had a wonderful time.
Thank you, Sun M, for that invigorating talk. Did y'all like what Sun had to say? If you do, feel free to tweet it out using our hashtag gdocExpo and show us some love. Give us a follow.